What if I told you that the messages traveling between ancient rulers carried more power than armies? That the fate of entire civilizations once rested on the speed of a runner's feet or the timing of a smoke signal? Long before satellites and smartphones, empires stretching from the deserts of Persia to the jungles of Mesoamerica built astonishing networks to bridge thousands of miles, networks so advanced they rivaled the efficiency of modern systems. These weren't just methods of communication, they were the beating heart of kingdoms, the invisible threads holding together history's greatest powers. And today, we're pulling back the curtain on these ancient marvels. Picture this: a lone runner sprinting through mountain passes, a sealed message strapped to his chest, knowing that every second counts. Or flames crackling atop a watchtower, their patterns spelling out warnings across entire regions in moments. These were the original lifelines of empires' systems born of desperation and genius, refined over centuries. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. These methods didn't just carry words. They carried secret orders that could launch wars, treaties that could forge peace, even whispers of rebellions that could topple dynasties. And the most fascinating part, many of these ancient techniques still influence how we communicate today. So how did they do it? How did civilizations separated by oceans and deserts manage to coordinate armies, collect taxes, and govern millions without a single wire or satellite? That's the story we're about to unfold, a tale of human ingenuity so bold, it'll make you rethink what's possible. From the relay runners of the Inca Empire, who could outpace modern mail carriers, to the coded fire signals of the Great Wall of China, we're diving deep into the systems that kept the ancient world connected. And trust me, by the end, you'll never look at your phone's send button the same way again, because every tweet, every text, it all stands on the shoulders of these forgotten messengers. Ready to uncover their secrets, let's begin. To understand just how critical messengers were in the ancient world, think of them as the internet of their time, except instead of fiber optics and satellites, they relied on foot power, horseback, and sheer human endurance. In empires like Rome and Persia, these couriers didn't just deliver mail, they were the glue holding entire civilizations together. Take the Roman cursus publicus, a state-run relay system so efficient, it could move messages across thousands of miles in days. Stations dotted along well-maintained roads housed fresh horses and riders, ready to sprint the next leg of the journey without pause. This wasn't just logistics, it was a masterpiece of engineering and foresight, allowing emperors to govern territories stretching from Britain to Egypt as if they were next door. Then there was Persia's Royal Road, a 1,600-mile marvel connecting the empire's heartlands to its farthest reaches. Herodotus marveled at its speed, noting how royal couriers could traverse the entire distance in just 9 days, a feat that would have taken ordinary travelers 3 months. But here's what made these systems revolutionary. They weren't just about speed, they were about control. A delayed message could mean a rebellion went unchecked, a battlefield order arrived too late, or a trade deal collapsed. That's why harming a messenger wasn't just a crime, it was an act of war. In Assyria, for example, attacking a royal courier carried the same penalty as striking the king himself, a grim reminder of how much power rested in these travelers' hands. Yet messengers did more than transmit orders, they shaped history. When Rome needed to rally its legions against Hannibal, or when Persian kings negotiated with distant Greek city-states, it was these unsung heroes who carried the words that changed the world. They weren't just delivermen, they were diplomats, spies, and sometimes even peacemakers. And their legacy, it's everywhere. The urgency of a breaking news alert, the reliability of overnight shipping. these modern miracles owe a quiet debt to the relay runners and horsemen who proved centuries ago that information is the ultimate power. Now let's turn back the clock even further to the very origins of long-distance communication, where smoke signals, drumbeats, and beacon fires lit the way for the empires that would follow. Before the invention of writing, before even the first roads were carved between cities, humans had already cracked the code of long-distance communication with nothing but fire and smoke. The earliest smoke signals weren't just random puffs. They were a language unto themselves, with different patterns conveying specific meanings across mountains and valleys. Indigenous tribes in North America used damp grass to create dense, controlled columns of smoke. 3 quick bursts might signal danger, while a single steady stream could mean all clear. Over in ancient Greece, historians like Polybius documented how armies used synchronized fire beacons to transmit coded messages across entire island chains, turning mountaintops into a kind of prehistoric telegraph network. But no one perfected this art like the Chinese during the Ming Dynasty. Along the Great Wall, soldiers manned towering beacon stations every few miles, each stocked with dry wood, sulfur, and straw ingredients calibrated to produce distinct colors and intensities. A single tower spotting Mongol horsemen would ignite its fire, triggering a chain reaction visible for hundreds of miles. Within hours, the emperor in Beijing could know of an invasion at the frontier, all without a single rider leaving their post. The system was so reliable it remained in use for over 2,000 years, yet smoke signals had their limits. You couldn't debate philosophy or negotiate trade deals with bursts of fire. That's why, as empires grew more complex, so did their methods. Enter the relay runners, the next leap in communication technology, where human stamina became the ultimate delivery system. Picture a team of Inca chasquis sprinting along the Andean highways, each runner covering a 6-mile stretch at altitudes that would leave modern athletes gasping. They carried quipus-knotted cords encoding everything from tax records to royal decrees, and passed them baton-style at way stations, achieving speeds that could outpace a galloping horse over long distances. What made these runners extraordinary wasn't just their physical prowess. It was their role as living, breathing encryption devices. Unlike smoke signals, their messages could be detailed, nuanced, even secret. A Persian courier might swallow a coded scroll if captured, while Roman runners memorized sensitive dispatches to avoid written evidence. This was communication evolving from simple alerts to something far more powerful, the ability to transmit not just warnings, but wills, strategies, and secrets. And it was all made possible by the most advanced technology of all, the human body pushed to its absolute limits. From flames flickering on distant ridges to runners racing against time, these systems shared one unshakable truth: speed meant survival. Because in the ancient world, information wasn't just power, it was the difference between an empire's rise and its ruin. And as we'll see next, when civilizations needed to go even faster, they turned to the animal kingdom's ultimate speed machines, horses, ushering in an era where messages could fly across continents. The Inca chasquis weren't just runners, they were human marvels of endurance, navigating some of the most brutal terrain on Earth at speeds that defy belief. Imagine sprinting up mountain passes at altitudes over 12,000 feet, where the air is so thin, every breath burns. Now imagine doing it for 6 miles straight, only to hand off your cargo to the next runner and collapse, knowing the message would keep racing forward without pause. This was the reality for the chasquis, whose relay network stretched over 25,000 miles, connecting an empire that spanned modern-day Peru, Ecuador, Chile, and beyond. Their secret: a meticulously organized system of tambos way stations stocked with food, water, and fresh runners, spaced at intervals matching a human's peak performance range. But the real genius lay in what they carried: quipus, intricate knotted cords that encoded everything from census data to military orders. Unlike smoke signals, these weren't just simple alerts. They were complex records, capable of conveying numbers, stories, even laws. A chasquis might deliver a quipu detailing grain shipments from one province, then return days later with a response tied in new knots, a bureaucratic dance conducted entirely without paper. And speed was non-negotiable. Historical accounts suggest urgent messages could travel up to 250 miles in a single day, faster than a horse could manage over the Andes' jagged peaks. Half a world away, the Greeks had their own version of superhuman couriers, the hemerodromoi, or day runners. Most famous among them was Pheidipides, whose legendary run from Marathon to Athens inspired the modern race. But while his story is mythologized, the role of these runners was very real. Greek city-states relied on them to deliver everything from Olympic results to declarations of war, their stamina honed by training that would rival today's ultramarathoners. So why entrust such critical work to human feet when horses existed? The answer lies in terrain and trust. In places like the Andes or Greek mountain trails, sure-footed runners could navigate paths too narrow or steep for animals. And unlike a horse, a trained courier could memorize sensitive messages or destroy them if captured, making them living, breathing encryption devices. Yet for all their speed, runners had one unavoidable limit: they were bound by geography. To cross deserts, seas, or vast plains, empires needed something even faster. Something that could defy the horizon itself. And so they turned their eyes upward to the wings of birds, the drift of clouds, and the flicker of fire in the night. Because when civilizations needed to outrun time itself, they didn't just rely on the earth beneath their feet. They harnessed the sky. When human runners and smoke signals weren't fast enough, ancient empires turned to the skies where feathered couriers could outpace any horse or soldier. Carrier pigeons weren't just birds, they were precision-guided messaging systems, their unerring homing instincts forged by nature over millennia. Picture a Persian general releasing a pigeon from a besieged city, its tiny leg carrying a plea for reinforcements rolled into a scroll no larger than a fingernail. Against all odds, that bird would dart over enemy camps and treacherous landscapes, covering hundreds of miles in a single day to deliver its cargo. The Romans perfected this system, maintaining dovecotes near military outposts where pigeons were raised, then transported to distant locations. When a message needed sending, the birds would be released to fly straight home, even across unfamiliar terrain. Julius Caesar famously used them to coordinate his conquest of Gaul, while medieval sultans relied on pigeon networks to govern sprawling territories from Cairo to Damascus. But perhaps their most dramatic role came during sieges, when these winged messengers became a city's last hope. When Genghis Khan's armies surrounded Beijing, defenders tied firecrackers to pigeons' tails, sending them back to ignite the invaders' own supply depots, an ancient form of aerial warfare. Yet pigeons had vulnerabilities. Hawks could intercept them mid-flight, storms blew them off course, and rival armies soon learned to shoot them from the sky. That's why the most critical messages were often sent in flocks, dozens of birds carrying identical scrolls to ensure at least one would get through. The system was so trusted that stock traders in 19th century Paris still used pigeons to send market prices faster than telegraphs could. What made these birds extraordinary wasn't just their speed, it was their defiance of geography. Where mountains, rivers, or armies blocked human messengers, pigeons flew undeterred. They carried ceasefire orders that ended battles, merchant invoices that fueled economies, even love letters between monarchs. In an age without satellites, they were the closest thing to instant communication the world had ever seen. But empires needed more than scattered avian messengers. They needed structured, reliable channels capable of moving not just words but people and goods. And so they turned their attention to carving pathways across the earth itself, engineering roads so vast they would endure for millennia. The Persian royal road wasn't just a dirt path, it was the internet highway of the ancient world, a stroke of bureaucratic genius carved across mountains and deserts. Imagine a messenger galloping into a way station, his horse foaming at the mouth, only to leap onto a fresh steed within seconds and thunder onward. Darius I didn't just build a road, he engineered a heartbeat for his empire, with over 111 way stations spaced precisely a day's ride apart. Each station kept horses fed and ready, their saddles permanently cinched for instant transfer. Herodotus wasn't exaggerating when he described these couriers as unstoppable. Their relay system could shuttle a message from Susa to Sardis, a distance equal to crossing modern-day Turkey to Iran in just 7 days. That's faster than some modern postal services, but the real innovation wasn't speed alone, it was security. Every royal courier carried a sealed passport, a clay tablet bearing the emperor's insignia that demanded cooperation from local governors. Attack a messenger and you weren't just challenging a man, you were defying the king's own voice. This wasn't just mail delivery, it was a psychological weapon. When Greek spies observed Persian couriers changing horses mid-gallop by swinging from one saddle to another, they realized this wasn't a kingdom, it was a machine. And at its core, the unshakable principle that information moved faster than rebellion could spread. Yet Rome took this blueprint and supercharged it. Where Persia relied on royal decrees, the Romans built a public service, the cursus publicus, open to governors, generals, even wealthy merchants who could pay the toll. Their secret standardization, mile markers counted every 1,000 paces, while roadside inns offered not just horses but wheelwrights to repair axles. Tiberius once received urgent news from the Rhine frontier in just 9 days, a distance that would take ordinary travelers 3 months. But here's what set Rome apart: redundancy. If a bridge collapsed, alternate routes were pre-mapped. If a horse went lame, replacements stood ready at secondary posts. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was an obsession with control, turning the Mediterranean into a network as predictable as ticking clockwork. The irony, both systems shared one fatal flaw. For all their engineering brilliance, they depended on something fragile: trust. A bribed station master, a sabotaged bridge. These were the cracks that could topple empires. And when the last Persian courier vanished into the desert dust, when Rome's way stations crumbled into ruins, they left behind more than broken stones. They left a lesson that every golden age of communication is built on 2 things: the sweat of countless unnamed couriers and the unspoken faith that messages would always reach their destination. The Roman cursus publicus wasn't just a mail service. It was the central nervous system of an empire spanning 3 continents. Picture a scroll leaving Emperor Augustus' desk in Rome, racing northward through the Alps on horseback, then transferring to a river barge down the Rhine, all without missing a beat. Relay stations called mutations stood every 8 to 12 miles, each stocked with fresh horses, wheelwrights, and even veterinarians on standby. But the real marvel: the mansion's larger rest houses spaced every 25 miles, where exhausted couriers could swap out entirely while specialized clerks logged every dispatch with military precision. This wasn't just faster than previous systems, it redefined what empire-wide coordination could achieve. what set Rome's network apart was its ruthless standardization. Every horse had to meet strict height requirements. Every chariot axle was built to identical measurements so wheels could be swapped instantly. Even the saddlebags were waterproofed with beeswax to protect documents from storms. The system moved more than words. It transported census data, grain shipment manifests, even delicate glassware for provincial governors. When Pliny the Younger needed urgent legal advice from Trajan while governing Bithynia, the cursus publicus delivered their correspondence across the Aegean in under a week, a distance that still challenges modern ferries. Yet this efficiency came at a price. The service was so vital that tampering with it carried the death penalty. During the Batavian Revolt in 69 AD, rebels specifically targeted way stations to cripple Roman communications, proving how dependent the empire had become on its courier network. And here's the twist. While Rome obsessed over land routes, other powers were mastering an even more unpredictable highway, the open sea. Phoenician traders had long used fast galleys to shuttle messages between coastal cities, but the Carthaginians turned maritime messaging into an art form. Their sleek Liburnian ships, powered by triple banks of oarsmen, could outmaneuver storms and pirates alike. A Carthaginian captain might leave Carthage at dawn with treaty terms, skirt the Sicilian coast by moonlight, and deliver them to negotiators in Syracuse before the next sunset. Unlike land couriers constrained by terrain, these ships could take direct paths across the Mediterranean's blue expanse, provided they survived its wrath. The real game-changer came with the invention of the diplomatic pouch, a water-proofed leather satchel containing wax-sealed scrolls, weighted to sink if thrown overboard during pursuit. Greek historians recount how an entire naval battle was once averted when a Macedonian envoy's ship intercepted a Persian vessel mid-sea, capturing orders that revealed an impending invasion. Suddenly, the waves weren't just barriers, they became the ultimate information superhighway, where control of shipping lanes meant control of the narrative itself. Rome eventually merged both systems, land and sea, into a hybrid network unmatched until the railroads. But the lesson lingered, whether by hoof or hull. The empires that mastered communication didn't just deliver messages. They shaped reality itself, one dispatch at a time. And as we'll see next, when neither horse nor ship could guarantee speed, civilizations turned to an even more audacious solution, harnessing the very winds and stars as their messengers. For coastal empires, ships weren't just vessels, they were floating lifelines stitching together distant shores. The Phoenicians, masters of the Mediterranean, didn't just trade purple dye and cedar wood, they traded secrets. Their sleek triremes, manned by crews who could read currents like maps, became the first true maritime mail carriers. A captain might leave Tyre with a clay tablet detailing embargoes against rival ports, only to have it translated into 3 languages by the time he reached Carthage. But the real innovators were the Carthaginians, who turned their ships into mobile command centers. During the Punic Wars, admirals used signal flags to coordinate entire fleets across miles of open water, a system so precise it allowed them to encircle Roman galleys with terrifying efficiency. Then came the Vikings, whose longships doubled as stealth couriers. A dragon-prowed vessel slicing through North Sea fog could deliver a Jarl's ultimatum to English shores faster than any land-bound messenger. But Viking communication wasn't just about speed, it was about deception. They'd send decoy ships along predictable routes while the real message slipped through uncharted fjords. Storm waves that sank lesser boats became their allies, as Norse navigators used them to outrun pursuers. Yet maritime messaging was a gamble with the gods. A storm off Malta in 255 BC swallowed an entire Carthaginian dispatch fleet, erasing critical battle plans. pirates lurked in narrow straits, ready to sell intercepted scrolls to the highest bidder. That's why the smartest captains never relied on a single ship. Like carrier pigeons, they'd send duplicates by separate routes, a tactic the Venetians later perfected, ensuring that even if one galley fell to Barbary raiders, another might slip through. The true genius of these systems, they didn't just carry messages, they carried cultures. A Phoenician ship bearing cuneiform tablets might also transport a Babylonian astronomer's star charts, sparking new navigation techniques in Greece. Viking longships delivered Norse sagas to Irish monks, who preserved them alongside Christian texts. Every hull cutting through the waves was a time capsule, carrying words that would reshape languages, laws, and legends. But when the stakes were highest, when a messaged exposure could doom a kingdom, mere secrecy wasn't enough. That's when civilizations turned to codes so clever, they'd baffle modern cryptographers. From invisible ink brewed from crushed mollusks to scrolls wrapped in lead and tossed overboard at the first sign of trouble, the ancient world's spycraft was as ingenious as its ships. And it all began with a simple premise. If information was power, then controlling who could read it meant controlling the world. Hidden beneath the wax of a Greek general's tablet or coiled around a Spartan commander's staff lay secrets that could alter the course of wars. Cryptography in the ancient world wasn't just about hiding messages, it was about bending reality, ensuring that even if an enemy intercepted a dispatch, the words would remain as useless as a broken cipher wheel. Take Julius Caesar's infamous shift cipher, where each letter of a message hopped 3 places down the alphabet. To an unsuspecting observer, it looked like gibberish. But to a trusted officer with the key, it revealed troop movements or assassination plots with chilling clarity. This wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary, turning ordinary parchment into a battlefield where only the chosen could fight. The Spartans took it further with the citale, a deceptively simple wooden rod. Wrap a strip of leather around it just right, and the scrambled letters would snap into orders like "attack at dawn." Unroll it without the matching rod, and you'd stare at nonsense. But here's what made these systems extraordinary. They didn't rely on complex machinery or rare materials. They exploited psychology. A Roman spy might slip a coded message into a merchant's seemingly innocent pottery order, knowing the recipient would boil the clay to reveal hidden ink. Indian diplomats went as far as training parrots to recite encrypted treaties, their squawks meaningless to eavesdroppers but decipherable to handlers who knew the bird's cadence held the key. Yet the most audacious codes weren't written at all, they were worn. Persian agents posing as merchants would stitch patterns into their robes, the embroideries, knots, and colors corresponding to troop numbers or supply routes. A harmless rug seller unfolding his wares in a crowded market might actually be transmitting a map of siege engines to an ally across the room. Even hairstyles carried secrets. Celtic messengers braided their hair in specific ways to signal the size of approaching war bands, turning their own bodies into living scrolls. The brilliance of these methods lay in their adaptability. When the Roman senator Cicero needed to warn his brother of a conspiracy, he didn't trust ink. Instead, he sent a slave with instructions to memorize every syllable, then dissolve the evidence in vinegar. That slave became the message, a human vessel who could be interrogated, tortured, even killed without revealing a thing, because the words existed only in his mind until the exact moment they were spoken to the right ears. But for all their ingenuity, these systems shared one vulnerability. They required the recipient to know the rules, lose the cipher key, misremember the embroidery pattern, or mishear the parrot's squawk, and the message was lost forever. That's why the most powerful encryption of all wasn't a code or a cipher. It was the messenger themselves. And as we'll see next, when empires needed to guarantee a secret safety, they didn't just hide the message. They hid the messenger in plain sight. A merchant's cart creaking along the Silk Road might carry more than silks and spices hidden in the false bottom could be a satchel of scrolls, their contents so sensitive the slightest slip meant death. This was the shadow world of disguised messengers where survival depended on blending in. Byzantine agents perfected the art of the living letter, memorizing entire treaties verbatim while posing as harmless pilgrims. Their training was brutal. Candidates spent months repeating complex battle plans until they could recite them backward, all while enduring simulated interrogations where a single stumble meant failure. The payoff: no physical evidence to intercept. A captured messenger might confess a dozen false routes before their execution, while the real message locked safely in their mind had died with them. Japan's shinobi took deception further. A ninja messenger might fake a limp to explain slow travel, only to vanish into a forest at night, following hidden trails marked by notched trees. Some carried hollowed-out staffs containing maps, or used elaborate codes disguised as folk songs. One legendary account tells of a ninja posing as a blind masseur, his tapping cane actually counting guard patrols as he moved through an enemy camp. The most skilled could even weaponize perception, leaving a fake trail of breadcrumbs for pursuers, while the real message traveled west via an unsuspecting tea merchant's caravan. But stealth came at a cost. The Byzantine spymaster Procopius wrote of messengers who swallowed poison rather than risk revealing secrets under torture. In medieval Europe, a single misplaced accent when posing as a local could unravel years of cover. That's why the smartest empires didn't just rely on disguises. They engineered entire ecosystems to fund and protect their networks. The Persian Empire levied special taxes just for their postal system, while Rome's cursus publicus was bankrolled by provincial governors who knew faster communication meant quicker military response to rebellions. Along the Inca highways, local communities were required to maintain tambos and feed chasquis as part of their labor tax, a system so efficient, historians estimate it moved messages faster per capita than any pre-industrial society. Yet the real genius lay in making messengers untouchable. Mongol Khans issued golden Pesas passport tablets that guaranteed safe passage across continents. To harm a bearer was to invite annihilation, as one unfortunate Russian prince learned when his men robbed a Mongol courier. The resulting retaliation erased his city from the map. From bribes to blood oaths, empires understood. A messenger network was only as strong as the economy and fear that sustained it. And as we'll see next, when gold and threats weren't enough, civilizations turned to something even more powerful: the written word itself, forged into documents that could open borders or declare wars with a single stroke of ink. Building and maintaining these vast communication networks wasn't just an engineering challenge, it was an economic one. The sheer cost of keeping roads paved, way stations stocked, and messengers fed could bankrupt a lesser kingdom. Take the Inca Empire, where every household owed labor as part of the mitre tax system. Villagers spent months each year repairing suspension bridges or hauling supplies to remote tambos, knowing their work kept the chasqui runners sprinting across the Andes. This wasn't volunteerism, it was compulsory service, enforced with the same rigor as military conscription. But the Incas understood something profound. A message delayed by a collapsed bridge could mean a rebellion went unchecked, or a harvest spoiled before relief arrived. Their economy wasn't built on gold, it was built on speed. Rome took a different approach. The cursus publicus consumed nearly 15% of the imperial budget at its peak, funded by heavy taxes on provinces. Governors grumbled, but the returns were undeniable. A single well-timed dispatch could reroute grain shipments to avert a famine or mobilize legions to crush an uprising before it spread. The system was so vital that Emperor Diocletian issued price edicts fixing the cost of horse feed and wheel repairs, ensuring no local profiteering could slow the empire's heartbeat. Yet these systems didn't collapse because they were inefficient, they fell because the empires sustaining them did. When Rome's borders shrank, bandits overran way stations and repairs stopped. The Inca's tambos, once bustling with runners, stood empty after Spanish conquest severed the network's purpose. A messenger system is only as strong as the power backing it. Without taxes to pay couriers or soldiers to guard roads, even the fastest networks crumbled into silence. The lesson: ancient empires treated communication like we treat electricity, an invisible necessity so critical its cost was never questioned. Until suddenly it was gone, and with it the ability to govern, to warn, to connect. The ruins of their relay stations remind us infrastructure isn't just stone and timber. It's the lifeline of civilization itself. Every great communication network carries within it the seeds of its own collapse, not through failure, but through success. The Roman cursus publicus didn't fade because it was inefficient. It vanished because the empire it served fractured into pieces. Picture the last official courier galloping down the Via Appia in 476 AD, his saddlebags stuffed with scrolls that would never reach their destinations. As barbarian kingdoms carved up the empire, they inherited the roads but lacked the centralized bureaucracy to maintain the relay stations. Within decades, weeds choked the once pristine way stations, and the fastest communication system the world had known became a ghost haunting broken milestones. The Mongols faced a different fate. Their legendary Yam network, a horse relay stretching from Hungary to Korea, collapsed not from invasion, but from internal splintering. After Genghis Khan's death, rival Khans turned the system against each other, using the same speedy riders to deliver declarations of war between factions. By the 1400s, the Silk Road's once secure routes became battlegrounds, and messages that once took weeks now took seasons if they arrived at all. But technology played its part too. The printing press didn't just make books cheaper, it shattered the monopoly of royal messengers. Why wait for a courier to deliver a prince's decree when pamphlets could spread news to thousands overnight? Yet, even as new inventions emerged, fragments of the old systems clung to life. In remote corners of the Andes, chasquis runners still carried quippers into the 1600s, defying Spanish attempts to replace them with horseback riders. Persian pigeon posts operated covertly during wartime well into the 1800s, their birds dodging bullets to deliver last-ditch pleas for reinforcements. What's astonishing isn't that these systems died, it's how long they endured. The Great Wall's beacon towers saw their final smoke signals during the 19th century Opium Wars, 2,000 years after their invention. Roman road markers guided Napoleon's armies, their inscriptions still legible beneath the mud, and perhaps most haunting of all, modern satellite images reveal the ghostly outlines of the Inca highway system, its path still traced by indigenous farmers who unknowingly walk in the footsteps of history's greatest runners. The real legacy of these networks isn't just in the messages they carried, but in the ideas they planted. The concept of a postal service open to all citizens. That traces back to Rome's cursus publicus, overnight shipping, a direct descendant of the Mongol yam. Even the internet's packet switching technology mirrors the redundancy of Persian couriers, where multiple messengers carried identical scrolls to ensure delivery. Today, we tap screens instead of lighting signal fires, but the goal remains unchanged: to conquer distance, to outpace uncertainty, to make the world feel small. And that brings us to the ultimate question: how do our modern systems truly compare to the ingenuity of the ancient world? From fiber optics to satellites, we've built networks that would stagger our ancestors. Yet for all our speed, have we lost something they understood instinctively? That communication isn't just about information, it's about trust, about the unbroken chain of human hands and hearts that carry meaning forward. When a Roman courier swore an oath to protect his scroll with his life, or when a chasquis runner collapsed after passing his quipu, they weren't just delivering data. They were upholding a promise, one we've inherited, even if we've forgotten its weight. The Persian royal road didn't just move messages, it built the blueprint for the digital age. Those relay stations spaced a day's ride apart. They functioned like ancient server farms, ensuring data, whether carved on clay or flashing as fiber optic light, could hop seamlessly toward its destination. Modern logistics giants like FedEx or Amazon's distribution centers owe a quiet debt to Darius I's vision. Break a journey into manageable segments, optimize each transfer point, and watch speed multiply. Even the Internet's packet switching technology, where information fractures into pieces to race through the fastest available routes, echoes the Persian practice of sending duplicate scrolls via separate couriers. The tools have changed, but the obsession remains unchanged. Beat the clock, whatever the cost. Yet for all our gigabytes and satellites, ancient systems still hold surprising advantages. Take security. A Roman diplomat memorizing a sensitive treaty could cross enemy lines with nothing incriminating on his person, a trick modern spies might envy, given how digital footprints linger forever. And while we encrypt emails with algorithms, the Spartan Citale cipher required physical possession of a specific wooden rod to decode messages, making interception useless without the right artifact. Sometimes low-tech solutions outsmart high-tech vulnerabilities. The real turning point came with volume, not speed, where a medieval pigeon could carry one tiny scroll. A single undersea cable now transmits millions of cat videos per second. But this explosion of access has a downside: noise. Ancient couriers hand-delivered only the most critical dispatches, declarations of war, royal successions, treaties. Today, buried beneath spam and memes, the weight of individual messages has diminished. A Babylonian merchant would faint at the thought of sending "lol" across continents in milliseconds. History's most pivotal messages reveal what we've gained and what we've lost. When Pharaoh Ramses II needed to negotiate peace with the Hittites, his envoys traveled for months, their clay tablets demanding absolute attention upon arrival. Contrast that with a modern diplomat dashing off a tweet during recess. Urgency once demanded physical risk, now it's diluted by convenience. Perhaps that's why the Library of Congress preserves every public tweet, while the letters of Augustus survive as fragments. We've traded permanence for volume. The ultimate lesson lies not in the wires or the wax tablets, but in the human impulse behind them. Whether carved in stone or tapped on glass, communication is about bridging the gap between "I am here" and "I am heard." And that's a thread connecting the shouts of Neolithic hunters to your latest text, unbroken and unbreakable. History turns on moments sometimes carried in the trembling hands of a single messenger. Consider Queen Atossa of Persia, whose desperate plea for military aid, scratched onto a clay tablet around 500 BCE, may have been the first recorded chain letter. When her husband Darius launched an ill-fated invasion of Greece, Atossa's call for reinforcements raced across the royal road, reaching satraps as far as Egypt. But here's the twist: some historians believe that message never arrived intact. The original may have been altered by regional governors downplaying the crisis, leaving Darius's army stranded at Marathon, a miscommunication that arguably changed the fate of Western civilization. Then there's Hannibal's legendary battle plans, carried through alpine passes by riders who memorized every detail to avoid leaving written evidence. When Rome intercepted one such courier near the Trebia River, they found only an innocuous-looking merchant with a head full of numbers, the troop counts and supply routes hidden in plain sight as a recited grain inventory. This wasn't just secrecy, it was psychological warfare, forcing Rome to question every scrap of intercepted information. Even the Rosetta Stone, though not a message itself, became history's greatest cryptographic key. Napoleon's soldiers stumbled upon it in 1799, but its real power lay in the mundane bureaucratic decrees it preserved, tax records and temple ordinances that, when decoded, cracked open 3,000 years of Egyptian history. The irony, those dry administrative notes proved more enduring than any royal proclamation because they were duplicated across countless stones and steels. The ancients understood redundancy long before backup servers existed, but accuracy was always the Achilles heel of these systems. A Babylonian merchant's complaint letter from 4,000 years ago, recently translated, reveals a shipment mix-up where 20 jars of honey became 200 by the time it reached the king's scribes. Multiply such errors across empires, and you begin to grasp the chaos battle orders misremembered by exhausted runners, smoke signals misread in fog, pigeon-borne scrolls nibbled by rats before delivery. The most shocking part, many leaders knew their messages were corrupted but lacked alternatives. When Julius Caesar's encrypted dispatch about Pompey's movements arrived with a garbled cipher key, he reportedly shrugged and said, "Fortune favors the bold," then marched straight into a trap. These weren't just mistakes, they were systemic flaws woven into the fabric of ancient communication. A Persian satrap might embellish crop reports to avoid the king's wrath, just as Inca quipu keepers could tweak knot patterns to shift blame for shortages. Every messenger, every scribe, every signal fire tender became a potential point of failure. And in that vulnerability lies a humbling truth. The messages that shaped history weren't always the ones sent. They were the ones that survived the gauntlet of human error, whether by luck, cunning, or sheer stubborn repetition. Now consider this: if our ancestors could build empires with such fragile systems, what does that say about our own? When a single dropped Wi-Fi signal can derail a stock trade or a mistranslated tweet sparks diplomatic chaos, perhaps we're not so far removed from those Babylonian merchants after all. The medium changes, but the gamble remains: will the message arrive as intended, or will history twist it along the way? That uncertainty, more than any technology, is the thread connecting us to every courier, runner, and signal firekeeper who came before. Even the fastest messenger couldn't outrun a storm. Imagine a Babylonian courier trapped by sudden floods, his clay tablet dissolving into mud as rain blurred the cuneiform. Or a Mongol rider lost in the Gobai's whirling sands, his pazer, the golden passport that guaranteed safe passage, useless against nature's fury. These weren't just inconveniences, they were existential threats. The Battle of Marathon's doomed runner, Pheidipides, collapsing after his 250-kilometer sprint, wasn't an exception. He was the rule. Every empire faced the same brutal equation. Speed meant survival, but the costs were measured in lives. Weather was the universal saboteur. Persian smoke signals vanished in downpours, forcing sentries to resort to drumbeats that enemy scouts could mimic. Roman ships carrying dispatches sank in Mediterranean gales, taking critical orders to the seabed. The Inca, masters of mountain communication, watched helplessly as avalanches buried tambo way stations under tons of rock. And when the Nile flooded, Egyptian envoys found themselves stranded for months, their papyrus scrolls rotting in the humidity. Then came the human factor. Bandits stalked the Silk Road, not for gold but for the intelligence carried by unsuspecting merchants. Byzantine agents paid informants to lose rival messages in swamps, while Viking raiders deliberately intercepted Saxon couriers to spread disarray. Even trusted scribes could distort reality. Assyrian tax collectors were notorious for adjusting crop reports before they reached the king's eyes. The genius of ancient empires lay in their adaptations. When the Chinese realized single beacon fires were too vulnerable, they built backup towers with duplicate fuel stacks. Rome stationed marines at key ports to protect naval dispatches from pirates. But the most ingenious solutions came from the margins. Berber traders crossing the Sahara tide hollowed out ostrich eggs to their camels. Each egg contained a written message, buoyant enough to float if the caravan drowned in a sandstorm. And in the Andes, Inca chasquis developed a relay chant, passing verbal updates runner to runner like a game of telephone, ensuring that even if one collapsed, the message lived on in another's breath. These weren't just workarounds, they were acts of defiance. Against storms, against thieves, against the fragility of human memory, civilizations kept finding ways to say, "I am here." And in that struggle, they laid the groundwork for a truth we still live by today. Communication isn't just about technology, it's about stubbornness. From the dense forests of New Zealand to the sprawling savannas of West Africa, ancient cultures crafted communication systems as unique as their landscapes. The Maori of Aotearoa developed the remarkable tokatoko, carved message sticks that served as both map and memorandum. A runner carrying one of these intricately notched poles could navigate hundreds of miles between villages, each groove and symbol encoding directions, warnings, or invitations to gatherings. What made these sticks extraordinary was their dual purpose. The physical object authenticated the messenger's identity, while the carvings ensured the core message survived even if the bearer couldn't recall every detail. This wasn't just mail, it was portable, tamper-proof documentation carved in wood. Across the continent, the talking drums of West African kingdoms turned rhythm into language. Skilled drummers didn't just beat out signals, they mimicked the tonal patterns of spoken languages like Yoruba or Akan, allowing complex phrases to travel across valleys at the speed of sound. During the height of the Mali Empire, a single hour of drumbeats could relay a royal decree from Timbuktu to the Gold Coast, with each village's drummers amplifying and repeating the message like a living broadcast network. The genius lay in the drum's adaptability. The same instrument that announced market days could also mobilize entire regions against invaders, proving that communication wasn't always about the medium, but the mastery behind it. On the Great Plains, Native American tribes developed a silent solution to language barriers, an elaborate system of hand signals understood from Comanche territory to the Dakota Badlands. Scouts meeting strangers could negotiate safe passage through a series of gestures, palms raised for peace, fingers flicking like wolves' ears to signal danger, or sweeping arm motions describing distant landmarks. This visual language became so refined that during the Lewis and Clark expedition, Sacagawea's ability to interpret these signs often meant the difference between peaceful trade and violent confrontation. Unlike static writing systems, this was communication stripped to its essence, immediate, adaptable, and universally intelligible across cultures who spoke completely unrelated languages. What united these diverse systems was their deep connection to the environment. The Maori's tokatoko reflected their reverence for forests. The African drum languages harnessed the continent's vast acoustic spaces, and Plains Sign Language turned the open horizon into a canvas for dialogue. Each method solved the same fundamental problem: how to bridge distance and difference, but did so in ways that celebrated local ingenuity rather than imposing uniformity. When these systems collided with European colonialism, their sophistication often baffled outsiders. British troops in New Zealand initially dismissed Maori message sticks as primitive art, only to realize too late that their movements were being tracked and reported across the islands. Similarly, French traders in Senegal complained that drum messages traveled faster than their ships, giving local forces ample warning of their approach. These weren't just communication networks, they were early warning systems, cultural repositories, and sometimes the last line of defense against conquest. The transition from these organic systems to standardized messaging didn't happen because they were ineffective, but because empires demanded control. A Spanish viceroy could intercept a written dispatch, but how does one censor a drumbeat or confiscate a gesture? Yet traces persist. Modern emergency responders still use hand signals in noisy environments. Broadcast towers echo the relay principle of talking drums, and the very concept of encryption mirrors the Maori's carved layers of meaning. The echoes are everywhere if you know how to listen. Now consider the ultimate test of these systems, the chaos of war. When kingdoms clashed and survival hung in the balance, messengers didn't just carry information, they became the difference between victory and annihilation. From the smoke signals of besieged cities to the doomed riders of Waterloo, warfare would push ancient communication to its breaking point and beyond. War turns messengers into lifelines stretched to the breaking point. Picture Alexander the Great atop a windswept hill near Gaugamela, watching his beacon fires flicker across the Mesopotamian plain. Each flame was a silent command, red for advance, green for flank, smoke pulsing like a heartbeat to coordinate 30,000 men across miles of dust and chaos. This wasn't just communication, it was the general's sword arm extended across the battlefield. But beacons had one fatal flaw: they couldn't carry nuance. When Alexander needed to abort a charge or redirect supplies, only flesh and blood riders could dart through the fray. These couriers didn't just risk arrows, they navigated panic-stricken elephants, collapsing formations, and the terrifying knowledge that one misdelivered order could doom an entire flank. The stakes were never clearer than at Cannae, where Rome's inability to adapt messages in real time turned tactical genius into slaughter. Hannibal's double envelopment relied on luring Roman legions forward while his cavalry circled behind, a maneuver requiring perfect timing. According to Livy, Roman commanders sent repeated riders to adjust their advance, but the messages arrived too late or were drowned out by battle cries. By dusk, 50,000 men lay dead in the Apulian dust, their fate sealed not by inferior numbers but by fractured communication. Yet for every Cannae there were unsung triumphs. During the siege of Alesia, Caesar's Gallic allies smuggled messages past Vercingetorix's lines by hollowing out loaves of bread, a trick that bought Rome the hours needed to complete its circumvallation walls. Persian scouts under Xerxes tied tiny scrolls to the legs of migratory birds, hoping some would reach distant satraps. A few actually did. And in feudal Japan, ninja messengers disguised as monks used temple bells to transmit coded rhythms audible for miles, a sonic cipher enemies couldn't intercept. What's often forgotten are the human costs. Spartan runners trained by racing up Mount Tegitos with slabs of stone strapped to their backs, their lungs bleeding from the thin air. Mongol horsemen bound their thighs with leather thongs to stay in the saddle for days, only to dismount with legs permanently bowed. The Inca chasquis who collapsed after sprinting 10 miles at altitude didn't get a medal, he got replaced by the next runner in line. These weren't just employees, they were bondsmen, slaves, or conscripts for whom failure meant execution. A Hittite clay tablet records the fate of a messenger who lost a diplomatic scroll. His hands were cut off before being sent back to his king as proof of punishment. The cruelest irony, the messengers who succeeded often vanished from history. No one knows the name of the rider who carried news of the Greek victory at Marathon, though his 26-mile sprint birthed the modern race. The Aztec Painani, who raced from Veracruz to Tenochtitlan with warnings of Cortés' arrival covering 200 miles in 48 hours, gets a footnote at best. Their anonymity speaks volumes. Empires memorialize the messages, not the messengers. Yet without these human threads stitching together armies and empires, history would look radically different. Washington's midnight ride across the Charles River only succeeded because colonial militias had spent decades perfecting their own alert systems, lanterns in church steeples, drum patterns, riders who knew every back road. The same principle held from ancient Sumer to World War I. Battles are won by soldiers, but wars are won by communication, and always, always by the forgotten souls who carried it. Now consider this: when a Roman general's dispatch finally reached its destination after weeks of perilous travel, the messenger would typically say, "I bring word." Not my word or the emperor's word, but simply word, a humble reminder that they were merely the vessel. Yet in that humility lies their true legacy, the understanding that information has no value until someone risks everything to deliver it. The life of an ancient messenger wasn't just demanding, it was deadly. Imagine an Inca chasquis gasping for breath at 13,000 feet, his lungs burning as he sprinted across narrow mountain trails with nothing but a sheer drop on one side. Or a Roman courier galloping through Germania's dense forests, knowing every shadow could hide an ambush. These weren't just jobs. They were suicide missions where the odds of survival dwindled with every mile. The Aztecs had a grim name for their fastest runners, Painani, which literally meant those who die running, and for good reason. Spanish chronicles describe messengers collapsing at Moctezuma's feet, their hearts giving out after delivering urgent warnings about Cortés' advance. Verifying a message's authenticity became as crucial as delivering it. A Persian satrap receiving orders to empty his granaries needed absolute certainty that the scroll bore the king's seal, not a rebel's forgery. Roman generals developed an elaborate system of wax seals and signature knots on dispatch bags. Break the seal incorrectly, and the entire message was considered compromised. But the most ingenious methods came from Asia. Chinese officials during the Han Dynasty used tally sticks, bamboo rods split lengthwise, with one half kept by the sender and the other traveling with the courier. Reuniting the pieces was the only way to prove the message hadn't been altered. A single mismatch in the grain pattern could mean the difference between obeying an order and walking into a trap. Some civilizations turned verification into an art form. The Maya carved royal decrees into jade pendants worn by messengers, a material too hard to alter without leaving obvious tool marks. In Ethiopia, tightly wound parchment scrolls were dipped in beeswax. Any unwrapping attempt would crack the brittle coating, but perhaps the most brutal system belonged to the Mongols. When Genghis Khan needed absolute certainty, he'd send identical messages via 3 separate riders along different routes. Only when 2 matching versions arrived would the command be considered valid. The cost: 2 out of 3 messengers might die en route, a chilling calculation that prioritized accuracy over human life. The stakes of failed verification could rewrite history. In 54 BC, the Parthians intercepted a Roman dispatch and forged new orders, sending Crassus' army directly into an ambush at Carrhae, a disaster that cost Rome 7 legions. Centuries later, Byzantine Emperor Romanos Roman IV fell victim to a similar trick when fake peace terms reached him before the real ones at Manzikert, leading to catastrophic defeat. These weren't just battlefield blunders, they were systemic vulnerabilities that empires spent centuries trying to patch. Yet for all their ingenuity, ancient verification methods shared one glaring weakness: they relied on trust in the messenger themselves. A bribed courier could swap a sealed scroll. A tortured runner might reveal the secret hand gesture confirming his authenticity. That's why the final layer of security wasn't technology, it was terror. Assyrian messengers knew that if they failed their mission, their families would be flayed alive. The Maya painted messengers' bodies with symbolic marks. Returning without the correct response meant being sacrificed to the gods. Fear became the ultimate authenticator, the unbreakable seal that no forger could replicate. Now consider this paradox. The very systems designed to protect messages often doomed those who carried them. A Mongol rider racing against two counterparts knew 2/3 of them would perish. A Roman courier safeguarding a wax seal might be killed for refusing to surrender it. In the end, every empire faced the same brutal equation. To move information was to gamble with lives, and as we'll see next, when even these extreme measures failed, civilizations turned to their most brilliant minds to invent something even more secure: the science of codes and ciphers. Wax seals weren't just decorative, they were the ancient world's version of a digital signature, a tiny fortress of trust pressed into molten wax. Picture a Roman senator heating his signet ring over a candle, then pressing it into a dollop of wax pooling on a scroll's edge. The resulting impression, a snarling lion perhaps, or the senator's family crest, was more than a pretty emblem. It was a tamper-proof lock designed to shatter if anyone tried to pry open the scroll. The system was so reliable that even Julius Caesar's assassins reportedly left his personal correspondence untouched, fearing the consequences of breaking his distinctive dolphin seal. But wax wasn't the only medium for authentication. In Mesopotamia, scribes rolled cylinder seals, intricately carved stone tubes across wet clay tablets, leaving behind raised designs as unique as fingerprints. These seals didn't just identify the sender, they encoded authority. A royal cylinder might depict a king slaying a lion, reinforcing power even as it verified the message. Lose your seal, and you effectively lost your voice, which is why Mesopotamian officials wore them around their necks on cords, treating them like literal keys to the kingdom. Half a world away, Chinese bureaucrats wielded another ingenious tool, the chop mark. These personalized stamps, carved from jade or ivory, left inked impressions on silk scrolls that couldn't be replicated without the original. The Tang dynasty took it further, requiring multiple overlapping chops from different officials for high-stakes decrees, a bureaucratic checks and balances system etched in vermilion ink. Forge one signature, possible. Mimic 6 distinct chops, nearly impossible. Yet even these methods had vulnerabilities. A skilled thief could steal a signet ring or duplicate a cylinder seal's design. That's why the smartest systems layered physical marks with behavioral cues. Egyptian scribes developed unique handwriting quirks, a specific way of looping hieratic scripts characters that acted as hidden signatures. Persian satraps added watermark threads to parchment, visible only when held to light. And in Byzantium, officials sealed sensitive scrolls with wax tinted with rare pigments, so any substitute would betray its falsity under scrutiny. The brilliance of these techniques lay in their psychological weight. Breaking a seal wasn't just a crime, it was an act of defiance against the very idea of order. When Genghis Khan's envoys arrived in Khwarezm with wax-sealed trade agreements, the local governor's decision to execute them and melt the seals wasn't just brutality, it was a symbolic rejection of Mongol authority. The resulting war erased an entire civilization, proving that trust in communication wasn't just practical, it was existential. Now consider the flip side. What happened to all these authenticated messages once they'd served their purpose? Empires didn't just need to send information, they needed to preserve it. From the fire-hardened clay archives of Assyria to the silk-bound registers of imperial China, the next chapter in this story wasn't just about communication, but about memory itself. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building. It was the ancient world's command center for knowledge, where every scroll, every letter, every treaty was meticulously copied and shelved like a vast neural network of human thought. Picture a team of scribes hunched over papyrus in the flickering lamplight, their reed pens scratching out duplicates of diplomatic correspondence between Ptolemaic Egypt and distant Rome. These weren't just backups, they were strategic assets. When Cleopatra needed to reference a decades-old trade agreement with the Seleucids, her librarians could retrieve the original within hours, an unthinkable feat in an era when most rulers struggled to remember last year's edicts. The library's true power lay in its curation. Persian battle reports sat beside Greek philosophical debates, creating a cross-referenced web of intelligence that shaped policy across 3 continents. But Alexandria's glory overshadowed an even older marvel, the Persian Empire's archives at Persepolis. Here, administrators stored thousands of clay tablets detailing everything from provincial tax quotas to royal marriage negotiations. Unlike papyrus, these baked mud documents were virtually indestructible. A fire that would have obliterated Rome's paper records only hardened Persepolis tablets further, leaving modern archaeologists stunned by receipts for lumber shipments and troop movements from 2.5 millennia ago. The real genius, these archives weren't passive repositories. They functioned like ancient search engines, with clerks using cylinder seals to stamp categorization marks on the edges of tablets, allowing quick retrieval by date, region, or subject. Religious institutions took record-keeping to another level entirely. In the temple complexes of Mesopotamia, priest-scribes maintained celestial diaries, clay tablets documenting astronomical events alongside corresponding political omens. A comet sighting in 1832 BCE wasn't just logged as a celestial event, it was annotated with its interpreted meaning for the king's military campaigns. These temples became the first data centers where divine will and human messaging intertwined. Similarly, Buddhist monasteries across Asia turned palm leaf manuscripts into sacred networks. Monks at Nalanda University in India meticulously copied sutras onto treated leaves, then exchanged them with Tibetan and Chinese counterparts through caravan routes, a spiritual postal service spanning thousands of miles. The Vatican's medieval archives reveal how faith shaped communication logistics. Papal bulls' official decrees sealed with lead bullier were dispatched across Europe via a relay system of bishoprics and monasteries. Each stop not only provided fresh horses but also made copies on vellum, creating a distributed backup system centuries before cloud computing. When King John of England defied the Church in 1215, it was this network that mobilized bishops from Portugal to Poland against him, proving how religious infrastructure could outmuscle royal couriers. What united these systems was their dual purpose, preserving truth and projecting power. The Assyrians stored treaties in temple vaults so the gods could witness them. Breaking such an oath meant divine retribution. Jewish communities perfected the Geniza, a sacred storeroom for worn-out scriptures where not a single letter could be destroyed, only archived. Even the Aztecs burned their rulers' correspondence during rituals, believing the smoke carried messages directly to the gods. This wasn't just filing, it was communication elevated to the cosmic scale. The irony, these vast archives often outlived the empires that built them. When Julius Caesar accidentally burned Alexandria's library during his siege in 48 BCE, the real tragedy wasn't the lost scrolls, it was the collapse of a system designed to make knowledge immortal. Yet fragments endured. A single surviving tablet from Persepolis might detail a long-forgotten grain shipment, but its cuneiform script whispers something far grander. that every receipt, every letter, every royal decree was ultimately a prayer against oblivion. And in that struggle, the ancients built something more enduring than stone. They built memory itself. Now consider this. When a monk in 9th century Constantinople painstakingly copied a crumbling Roman tax record onto fresh parchment, he wasn't just preserving dry bureaucracy. He was passing a torch across centuries, ensuring that a receipt for Egyptian wheat could one day tell us how empires fed themselves. Because in the end, the messages that mattered most weren't always the grand proclamations. They were the mundane records that refused to be forgotten. Religion didn't just shape beliefs, it built highways for words to travel. The Oracle of Delphi didn't merely whisper prophecies. She became ancient Greece's most influential broadcaster, her cryptic verses carried by pilgrims to every corner of the Mediterranean. Imagine an Athenian general pausing his war preparations to consult the Pythia's latest pronouncement, or a Sicilian merchant altering his trade routes based on her ambiguous riddles. These temple messages rippled outward like stones tossed in a pond, transforming spiritual sites into de facto news agencies where divine will and human gossip mingled freely. Buddhist monks turned scripture carrying into sacred marathon. Along the Silk Road's dust-choked paths, saffron-robed travelers moved like human libraries, their memorized sutras passing from tongue to tongue across languages, their palm leaf manuscripts carefully wrapped against desert storms. When the Chinese monk Xuanzang returned from India in 645 AD, his 657 texts didn't just fill pagodas with wisdom. They created the first Pan-Asian information network, linking Sanskrit scholars in Taxila with Chinese translators in Chang'an through a chain of monastery way stations. Christianity's explosive growth owed much to its mastery of epistolary networks. Paul's letters to Corinth or Rome weren't private musings, they were carefully copied and circulated like spiritual chain mail, read aloud in house churches from Ephesus to Carthage. The real stroke of genius, these texts were written in common Greek rather than elite Latin, ensuring even fishermen and farmers could become information nodes. By 300 AD, a bishop in Alexandria could quote a letter written by his counterpart in Spain mere months earlier, a speed unimaginable for secular messages of the era. Yet amid these storied male messengers, history often overlooks their female counterparts, the priestesses, deaconesses, and merchant women who moved sacred words through backchannels. At Delphi, the Pythia herself was always a woman, her divine utterances translated and sometimes edited by male priests. Early Christian women like Phoebe of Cenchreae didn't just deliver Paul's letters, they interpreted them for local congregations, their voices shaping theology as they walked Roman roads. In Japan, shrine maidens called Miko carried imperial edicts between Shinto temples, their red hakama skirts fluttering like signal flags through cedar forests. These women navigated unique dangers. A male monk might be robbed, a female messenger risked far worse. The Venerable Bede's accounts describe Anglo-Saxon abbesses using embroidery codes, sewing hidden Latin phrases into decorative borders to safely convey messages about Viking movements. Byzantine noblewomen exploited their invisibility in patriarchal systems, smuggling theological debates in cosmetic jars during the iconoclasm controversies. Their legacy lingers in unexpected places, the quilt patterns of underground railroad conductors, the lace-making traditions of Venetian nuns who encoded naval intelligence in thread. What united these sacred couriers, male and female, was their dual mission. Every scripture delivered, every oracle repeated, every letter copied wasn't just transmitting information, it was performing an act of faith. When a Buddhist monk memorized the Heart Sutra to carry it across the Himalayas, or when a Christian deaconess whispered forbidden gospels in catacombs, they weren't just messengers. They were living testaments to an idea far more powerful than any single message, that words could bind continents together, even when empires fell apart. Now consider this paradox. While temples and churches preserved countless sacred texts, we know shockingly little about the individuals who physically moved them. We have Paul's letters, but not the name of the sailor who braved autumn storms to deliver them to Crete. Buddhist sutras survive in pristine condition, while the footprints of the monks who carried them vanished in desert winds. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of divine messaging. It wasn't about who carried the word, but how far the word itself could travel. History books love to sing of swift-footed Phadipides and Mongol horsemen, but whisper the names of women who moved empires with their words. Take Hatshepsut's handpicked envoys, elite female diplomats who sailed to Punt not with weapons, but with cedarwood chests of negotiable treasures. These weren't mere gift-bearers. They were political operatives decoding foreign courts through subtle cues, their scarves embroidered with hieroglyphs that doubled as coded maps. When they returned to Thebes with ivory and incense, they also carried intelligence on rival kingdoms' weaknesses, intelligence that fueled Egypt's golden age. Byzantine Princess Anna Komnene took a different approach. While chronicling her father's reign, she meticulously documented the empire's relay stations, noting how eunuch messengers used perfume-soaked scrolls to mark urgency. A lavender scent might indicate a routine tax report, while myrrh signaled imminent invasion. Her writings reveal an unspoken truth. Women weren't just sending messages, they were designing the systems. When Viking raiders besieged Constantinople, it was Anna who organized the fire beacon network that alerted coastal defenses, saving the city through coordinated flashes across the Marmara Sea. Yet for every Anna or Hatshepsut, countless others worked in shadows. Celtic queens like Boudica employed bard spies who memorized battle plans in poetic meter, their verses innocuous to Roman ears. In Mughal India, royal women like Nur Jahan used henna designs to conceal troop movements, the swirls on a dancer's hands corresponding to mountain passes. Even the silk routes hid their female strategists. Nestorian Christian merchants' wives in Samarkand stitched coded mercantile deals into carpet patterns, their looms weaving commerce and conspiracy alike. The oversight isn't accidental. Roman historians dismissed Cleopatra's messenger network as whispering through curtains, ignoring her system of mirrored heliographs that outmaneuvered Octavian's navy. Medieval monks recast Germanic priestesses' rune sticks as witchcraft, erasing their role in coordinating tribal alliances. This wasn't just bias, it was deliberate obfuscation. Because when women controlled information flow, they challenged power itself. Now consider the silent partners in this dance, creatures whose wings, hooves, and instincts surpassed even the cleverest human systems. Beyond carrier pigeons, camels became living data banks for Sahara traders, their humps concealing hollowed-out amulets stuffed with papyrus. The Moch of Peru bred llama caravans whose ear notches recorded tribute payments as precisely as quippers. And in the Arctic, Inuit hunters read shifting seal migration patterns like bulletins, interpreting nature's messengers long before the first postal stamp existed. The real surprise, some animals volunteered their services. Indian mahouts reported war elephants that memorized multiple routes to secret river fords, trumpeting coded warnings when enemies approached. Pliny the Elder wrote of dolphins delivering fishermen's messages between coastal towns, a feat modern marine biologists now find plausible given the species' intelligence. Even bees played courier. Mayan beekeepers trained swarms to cluster at specific jungle shrines, their arrival signaling distant allies to mobilize. What united these creatures, from scarab beetles carrying miniature scrolls in ancient Thebes to Timur's legendary message cheetahs, was their uncanny reliability where humans failed. A pigeon might be shot down, but no barbarian guard would suspect a lumbering camel's ornamental harness hid battle plans. No storm could scatter ants ferrying seed-sized clay tablets between Mesopotamian grain silos. In the end, empires didn't just rely on animals, they entrusted them with survival itself. The lesson echoes across millennia. Communication was never just about technology or speed. It was about seeing potential where others saw only tools or prey. Whether through a priestess's whispered chant or a dolphin's leap, the ancient world's true genius lay in recognizing that messages move best when they ride the unexpected. And as we'll discover next, sometimes the most powerful delivery system wasn't a creature or a runner, but the very landscape itself. The Mongols didn't just ride horses, they turned them into living telegraphs. Each pony in their legendary Yam relay network was bred for one purpose: to run a single, brutal stretch at full gallop before collapsing at the next station, where a fresh mount stood ready. These weren't the graceful Arabian stallions of Persian kings. They were stubby, thick-maned beasts with lungs like bellows, capable of charging across frozen steppes where other horses would founder. A message could leap from the Danube to the Yellow River in 10 days, carried by riders who slept in the saddle, surviving on dried mare's milk and raw meat stuffed under their coats to thaw. The system's brutality was its genius. No single horse or rider completed the journey, but the words always did. Yet horses were just one thread in this bestiary of messengers. In the Swiss Alps, St. Bernard dogs trotted through blizzards with tiny parchment scrolls sewn into their collars, their uncanny sense of direction defying whiteout conditions that would trap human couriers for weeks. The Romans employed Molossian war dogs not just for battle, but to sprint between legionary forts with lead message tubes clamped in their jaws, a practice so effective. Plutarch recounts how one dog swam across a raging river to deliver its dispatch after its handler drowned. Then there were the camels, the desert's answer to the Mongol pony. Arab traders perfected the art of hiding silk-wrapped letters in hollowed-out camel teeth, knowing the scent would deter thieves from searching the animal's mouth. Along the Sahara's salt routes, Tuareg caravans used a rhythmic tapping code on their camels' harnesses to relay warnings about bandits or shifting dunes, turning the entire train into a moving communication chain. But the most ingenious animal messengers weren't domesticated at all. Polynesian navigators trained frigate birds to carry lightweight coconut shells inscribed with glyphs between islands, exploiting the birds' unerring homing instincts over hundreds of miles of open ocean. In the Amazon, Tupi tribes used electric eels, yes, eels, as living signal devices. By gently stimulating the creatures in patterned sequences, they could transmit basic warnings upriver via the water itself, a biological telegraph preceding Morse code by centuries. What made these creatures indispensable wasn't just their speed or stamina, it was their ability to go where humans couldn't. A dog could scramble up a collapsed mountain pass. A camel could sniff out buried desert wells invisible to the eye, and a Mongol pony, it could vanish into the steppes' endless grass like a ghost, leaving no trail for enemies to follow. These weren't just animals, they were specialists, each evolutionarily fine-tuned for a niche no human invention could replicate. Yet for all their brilliance, animal messengers shared one vulnerability: they were bound by their biology. A horse could only run so far before its heart gave out. A carrier pigeon might be lured off course by a rival's trained hawk. That's why the greatest civilizations didn't rely on creatures alone. They wove them into systems where feathers and hoofbeats worked alongside smoke signals and coded drums. The result was a web of communication so resilient, it could survive the loss of any single thread. And it was this interplay between nature and human ingenuity that would inspire something far more enduring than any dispatch: the stories, songs, and artworks that turned messengers into legends. Because when words move fast enough, they don't just carry information, they spark the imagination. Hermes wasn't just a god with winged sandals, he was the ancient world's personification of connection itself. Streaking across the sky between Olympus and the mortal realm, his caduceus staff twined with serpents became more than a symbol. It was a visual shorthand for the sacred trust of messengers. But the Greeks weren't alone in elevating couriers to divine status. Hindu scriptures describe Narada, the celestial sage who danced through cosmic realms with his veena, strumming not just melodies but news-carrying whispers between gods and demons alike. What's striking about these mythological figures isn't their speed, but their liminality. They existed in the betweens, between truth and deception, between worlds, even between warring factions. A single misstep from Hermes could ignite divine wars, while Narada's gossip, yes, even gods gossiped, sometimes sparked cosmic reckonings. Art didn't just depict messengers, it immortalized their moments of transformation. Medieval tapestries like the Bayeux embroidery freeze-frame Norman couriers mid-gallop, their cloaks billowing as they deliver the fateful news of Harold's coronation to William. Look closely and you'll see their horses' flared nostrils, the white-knuckled grip on sealed scrolls, details that reveal the human urgency beneath the pageantry. Chinese scroll paintings took this further, portraying Tang Dynasty postal riders as streaks of ink against mountain vistas, their blurred forms suggesting motion so intense it transcended the static medium. The deeper symbolism often lurked in the margins. Renaissance artists hid Hermes' likeness in merchant guild halls, equating commerce with divine messaging. Maiastelli carved runners' footprints as dotted lines between city-states, turning diplomatic routes into sacred pathways. Even nursery rhymes preserved messenger lore. Think of Ride a Cock Horse to Banbury Cross, its lyrics echoing Tudor-era postal riders who raced through Oxfordshire. These weren't just artistic choices, they were cultural memory banks, ensuring that the risks and triumphs of ancient communication stayed alive long after the original systems crumbled. What mythology and art understood instinctively was this: messengers were alchemists. They didn't just carry words, they transformed them, infusing dry dispatches with the weight of human consequence. When a Benin bronze depicts a royal herald's exaggerated lips, it's not bad anatomy. It's emphasizing the sacred power of spoken decree. The Norse god Heimdall, who could hear grass grow and see 100 miles, wasn't just a watchman. His Jijala horn was the ultimate broadcast system, its blast audible across all 9 worlds. These stories encoded a universal truth: information was never neutral. It could bless or curse, build or burn, depending on who carried it and how. Now shift your gaze from myth to mechanism. Because while gods and tapestries celebrated messengers, real-world innovations were quietly revolutionizing how those messages moved, transitioning from divine intervention to human engineering. The next chapter wouldn't be written by Hermes' winged heels, but by the grind of gears and the flicker of semaphore towers. Paper didn't just carry messages, it transformed them into something light, durable, and dangerously portable. Picture a Han Dynasty official carefully brushing ink onto a sheet of mulberry paper, his characters flowing like silk threads. Unlike bulky bamboo slips or fragile pottery shards, this innovation could be folded, tucked into a sleeve, or even rolled into a hollowed-out walking stick. But the real revolution wasn't just the material, it was the scale. Suddenly, a single courier could carry a week's worth of imperial decrees in a satchel that once held 1 clay tablet. And when those papers reached their destination, They could be copied quickly, endlessly turning one edict into 100 with a team of scribes working by lamplight. Yet paper was only half the equation. The ink that darkened its surface held secrets of its own. Egyptian scribes had used soot and gum Arabic for millennia, but Chinese alchemists took it further, blending pine soot with glue made from stag horn to create a lustrous black that resisted fading. This wasn't just chemistry, it was information preservation. A tax record inked this way could survive centuries buried in desert sands, while a Roman wax tablet melted in the first rainstorm. Then came the scroll, the ancient world's first true information storage system. The Library of Alexandria didn't just collect scrolls, it weaponized them, stacking Greek translations of Persian military manuals alongside Egyptian medical texts. A single scroll case carried by a scholar might contain the combined knowledge of 3 civilizations, all because someone realized that continuous sheets could be wound compactly. The Romans refined this further with the diptych, 2 hinged wooden panels with wax interiors for temporary notes, creating the ancestor of today's notebook. But some innovations defied parchment altogether. During the Tang dynasty, Chinese generals lofted giant silk kites over battlefields, their fluttering patterns conveying coded troop movements to distant commanders. A red kite with 3 tails might signal cavalry to feint left, while a black diamond-shaped kite ordered archers to hold fire. This wasn't child's play, it was aerial warfare centuries before drones. Half a world away, the Greeks engineered something even more audacious: hydraulic telegraphs. Towers spaced across mountaintops housed identical water clocks with prearranged float markers. When one station lifted a torch, operators synchronized their drains, letting the water level reveal predetermined messages like "enemy sighted" or "send reinforcements." It was binary communication before the binary, a system so precise, Polybius claimed it could relay complex phrases across the Aegean in under an hour. What tied these inventions together wasn't just ingenuity, it was urgency. When Carthaginian ships appeared on Rome's horizon, there was no time to carve stone tablets. When Mongol hordes breached the Great Wall, smoke signals alone couldn't detail their numbers. Each leap from clay to papyrus, from drumbeats to hydraulic towers, was a race against the clock, a desperate bid to make meaning move faster than disaster. Now consider the quiet irony. Today, we tap screens to send words across oceans in milliseconds, yet we've lost something our ancestors understood instinctively. A Roman centurion's scroll bore his sweat-smudged fingerprints. A Tang kite carried the wind's whisper in its seams. These messages weren't just information, they were physical witnesses to history, artifacts of human effort that outlived empires. Perhaps that's the most enduring lesson of all. The medium isn't just the message. It's the memory of hands that crafted it, the breath that carried it, and the sheer stubborn faith that someone, somewhere, would listen. Ancient empires didn't just move messages, they built systems designed to outlast storms, wars, and human error, offering startling lessons for our digital age. Take resilience. When Roman roads crumbled, their engineers didn't just patch the damage. They layered fresh stone atop old, creating highways that endured for millennia. Modern tech giants could learn from this instead of chasing the next update. What if we designed apps and networks with the same multi-generational foresight? The Inca's Quipu system holds another clue. By encoding data in physical knots, they created a backup that couldn't be hacked or erased by power outages. In a world where cloud servers blink out during hurricanes, there's wisdom in blending the digital and the tangible. Adaptability was the lifeblood of these systems. Persian smoke signals evolved into maritime flares when empires expanded coastward, just as Mongol pony relays switched to camel caravans in desert territories. Today's rigid digital infrastructures dependent on undersea cables and satellites could take a page from this playbook. Imagine if emergency alerts used everything from drone networks to old-school shortwave radio during outages, ensuring no single point of failure. Even ancient security protocols feel eerily modern. Chinese officials verifying messages with split tally sticks anticipated blockchains, distributed ledgers by 2,000 years. The lesson: innovation isn't always about inventing, it's about recombining the old in brilliant ways. Yet the most timeless insight lies in their understanding of human psychology. A Babylonian merchant sealing a clay tablet didn't just want his words preserved. He needed the recipient to feel the weight of that seal pressed between his fingers. Compare that to today's endless email chains, where urgency dissolves in a sea of unread notifications. Ancient systems forced clarity through physical constraints. You couldn't carve 1,000 words onto a tiny oracle bone. In an era of information overload, their enforced brevity feels like a gift. The beating heart of these networks wasn't technology, but trust. When a Byzantine messenger swore an oath on his family's life to deliver a letter intact, he wasn't just following protocol, he was upholding a social contract. Modern encryption may be mathematically perfect, but it can't replicate the visceral certainty of watching a wax seal crack open under your hands. Perhaps that's why disinformation spreads so easily today. We've optimized for speed at the cost of accountability. Looking forward, the next revolution might not be in fiber optics, but in blending ancient wisdom with modern tools. Researchers are already experimenting with biological encryption, using DNA strands to store data, just as the Inca used knots. Disaster response teams study the Cherokee's intertribal signal fires to design fallback systems when cell towers fail. Even the humble courier is making a comeback. During internet blackouts in conflict zones, activists now train as sneakernet runners, carrying hard drives like digital quippers. The thread connecting past to future isn't just about moving information, it's about remembering why we bother. When a chasquis runner collapsed passing his quipu, or a Roman courier braved alpine blizzards, they weren't just delivering data. They were bridging the gap between "I am here" and "you are not alone." In that profound human need, little has changed, only the tools in our hands. From the flickering beacon fires of the Great Wall to the pounding footsteps of Inca chasquis racing through the Andes, history's greatest empires shared one unshakable truth: communication wasn't just a tool, it was the very pulse of civilization. These ancient networks weren't built by kings or conquerors alone, but by countless unnamed runners, riders, and signal keepers who braved storms, bandits, and brutal terrain to keep the world connected. Their legacy isn't just in the messages they carried, but in the audacious belief that no distance was too great, no obstacle too daunting when it came to bridging the gap between here and there. Think about the threads linking their world to ours. That notification buzzing in your pocket, it's the spiritual descendant of a Persian courier's galloping horse. The emergency alert that flashes across your screen, a direct echo of the Great Wall's smoke towers. Even our obsession with encryption mirrors the Spartan Citale cipher or the Inca's knotted quippers. The tools have changed, but the human impulse remains: to be heard, to be understood, to reach across the void and say, "I exist." Yet there's something haunting about how these systems faded. The last Roman courier who stumbled into a decaying way station, his scrolls now meaningless as the empire crumbled around him. The final chasquis runner collapsing on an empty mountain trail, his quipu destined never to be read. These networks didn't fail because they were flawed, they fell because the civilizations that nurtured them vanished. And that's the lesson that lingers: communication systems are only as strong as the societies that sustain them. So the next time you hit send, take a second to marvel at the chain of ingenuity that made it possible. You're not just tapping a screen, you're standing on the shoulders of pigeon handlers, camel drivers, and fire tenders who turned the impossible into routine. Their methods may seem primitive now, but their vision was anything but. They dreamed of a world where ideas could leap continents in a heartbeat, and against all odds they built it. Now it's your turn. Which of these ancient marvels left you in awe? Was it the Mongols' horse relays that could outpace the wind, the Byzantines' perfume-scented scrolls? Or maybe the Cherokees' language of hand signals that spoke across tribal lines? Drop your favorites in the comments. Let's keep these unsung heroes' stories alive. And if you've enjoyed this dive into history's forgotten networks, hit like and subscribe for more journeys into the past that shaped our present, because the best messages aren't just sent, they're passed.